What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we've got another fantasy football mock draft for you, but with a little bit of a twist because we'll be constructing our roster using the zero wide receiver strategy. So going running back heavy for the first several rounds, and then at the end, compared to what our roster could have looked like if we went best player available round by round as usual. Now, the reason we're going to be using Fantasy Pros today is because it really allows a lot of the flexibility for an exercise like this. And no worries, we'll be doing more of these types of drafts for future examples for you guys to dissect and get some information from. So keep an eye out for those as they come out. And additionally, if you haven't already, check out the description on the details to get a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide now. Get a discounted price while you still can pre-order. You've got everything from top 150 overall players, standard PPR, along with player individual bios, projections, rankings, and general fantasy advice. And if you guys enjoy, as always, hit that like button, subscribe, and we're about to kick this thing off here. Fantasy Pros, like we said, full point PPR, 12 teams will be drafting out of the 5th spot. Roster, nothing too crazy. 1 quarterback, 2 RBs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, a flex, and then 4 bench spots. No defenses, no kickers. We don't want this thing to last all day long. So let's get right into it. We will see who has been drafted to kick this thing off. And Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, as you can see, then Michael Thomas, Ezekiel Elliott. So this makes our selection pretty easy here. We're going Dalvin Cook, no question about it. Honestly, that's what I would be doing regardless if that's what the draft board looked like or even if Michael Thomas was there. So let's look at these selections that have taken place after our choice of Dalvin Cook. You see Kamara afterwards, Joe Mixon, Devontae Adams, Derrick Henry, Leonard Fournette. Definitely wouldn't be happening normally, but I think this is a great example of what can happen with these non-live drafts, the randomness built into it, and that kind of explains the selection there. You see DeAndre Hopkins, Julio Jones, Tyreek Hill, Austin Eckler, Chris Godwin, Aaron Jones, whose ADP will be all over the map, but I think somewhere here in the second round is a good spot for him. Let's go back to our draft board and see some of these running back names that are still available. And you see Nick Chubb still there, Miles Sanders, Todd Gurley, and I didn't think Nick Chubb would still be on the board for us. Now, I know this is full point PPR. He doesn't bring much to the table as a pass catcher, but in the late second round, and considering we're going running back heavy, well, to me, Nick Chubb should be the selection here. I don't like the fact that Kareem Hunt is still there. It really hurts Nick Chubb's value in my eyes, but he is still the best running back available. And if we stay true to our strategy, he should be the guy that we draft. And again, let's see the selections afterwards. Miles Sanders, unfortunately, is taken. I would have loved it if he somehow dropped to the 3rd round. I would have taken a chance on him, even though he's only a sophomore running back. Kenny Golladay, Travis Kelce, Cooper Kupp, George Kittle, Allen Robinson. Patrick Mahomes, I believe, is the first quarterback off the board, which you won't see too often. It's usually Lamar Jackson. And then Mike Evans in the 3rd round. Great value. I personally have him ranked a little bit higher than Chris Godwin, but that's just me. Looking at our other running backs, I already know who I'm going to be targeting. Todd Gurley, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Chris Carson. Then I think there's a bit of a drop-off. Honestly, I wouldn't even have Clyde Edwards-Helaire ranked this high. So for me, it's Chris Carson here, and it's not all that close. So as you can see, the suggestion about the percentage to take him is about 2%, but since we're going zero wide receiver for, let's say, the first 3 rounds, he is the selection there. And going back to the draft log here, after that selection of Chris Carson, you see Lamar Jackson, then Todd Gurley, Jonathan Taylor, Amari Cooper, DJ Moore, Zach Ertz, Adam Thielen, Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the 4th round, Keenan Allen, Juju Smith, Courtland Sutton, AJ Brown, Melvin Gordon, and Robert Woods. So now we have to go ahead and hit the wide receiver position really hard. And let's go ahead and see who is available there. You see Calvin Ridley, Devontae Parker, DJ Chark, Tyler Lockett. I'll go ahead and look at the extensive list here to make sure we aren't skipping over anyone. But no, I'm going to be going with Calvin Ridley here, folks, because personally, I have him ranked a little bit higher on my own personal draft board. I think he's going to continue to close the gap between Julio Jones and himself. And as far as explosive offenses, he should be on one of the most explosive in 2020 with the Atlanta Falcons. So we address our first wide receiver selection now. And as you can see, it's tough because our wide receiver 1 is Calvin Ridley, and then our wide receiver 2, well, there's going to be an even bigger drop-off there because after Calvin Ridley was selected, DK Metcalf went off the board, Stephon Diggs, Le'Veon Bell, Devontae Parker, someone we were looking at, Tyler Lockett as well, DJ Shark as well, Singletary, and T.Y. Hilton. So it's going to be tough in terms of wide receivers here. And just reminding you of our roster, we've got Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, and Chris Carson. So we need to continue to add pass catchers, wide receiver, tight end. Let's look at who's available at tight end. Mark Andrews is still there. Darren Waller is still there. But right now, wide receiver is a more glaring need. I'm going to go ahead and add Terry McLaurin here to our list, just because looking at the other wide receiver options, I think there's a lot of question marks. AJ Green, health, Jarvis Landry, so many mouths to feed. Julian Edelman, no more Tom Brady. And I realized there's really no quarterback in Washington, which is what makes McLaurin risky. But he's the wide receiver 1 there, no doubt about it. And I like his potential, even more so in dynasty formats. So let's continue to look what happens here with these draft picks and make a decision on who to take next, looking at the draft board. After our selection of Terry McLaurin, David Johnson, a little bit of a run on tight ends with Darren Waller, Mark Andrews. I was wondering if one of them would be available to us. AJ Green, Deebo Samuel, run on quarterbacks with Dak, Kyler, and Russell Wilson. Then Jarvis Landry, Julian Edelman, Michael Gallup. So a couple of those PPR guys being selected. And we could go wide receiver here again to continue to stockpile talent at that position, and I would totally understand that. But I'm going to kind of go ahead and just go next best available pass catcher, and to me, that means shifting to the tight end position, and I'm looking at Evan Ingram in that department. I love his upside. When he stays healthy, he is absolutely sensational. So we are going Evan Ingram there. And then we can go ahead and weigh out our options in terms of quarterbacks or starting to fill out our bench. And I can tell you right now, based on what was selected after us with Deshaun Watson, Tyler Boyd, Mark Ingram, Carson Wentz, Josh Allen, well, I'm going to probably go ahead and wait on quarterback a little bit more. Let's see who the best available are. Drew Brees, Matt Ryan. If I can get Matt Ryan in the next round, I'd be pretty happy. It's probably rolling the dice a little bit, but looking at the wide receivers here, let's go ahead and add another one for a bit of insurance because we've still only got 2, and it's Calvin Ridley and McLaurin. So looking at these names here, I see Will Fuller, Marquise Brown, Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones, John Brown, Brendan Cooks, just to highlight a couple names. And for me, actually, I have Brendan Cooks ranked the highest here. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 for the Houston Texans. Now, that's not to say he's going to be the new DeAndre Hopkins. That's absolutely crazy, but I do like his upside. So we're going Brendan Cooks here, and we'll go ahead and draft a couple of more rounds and then restart this bad boy to compare our rosters. But for now, this is the core of our team. Let's see what's going on at the quarterback position. Drew Brees is still there, so that means Matt Ryan was selected at one point or another after our selection of Brendan Cooks. You see Perriman, Rodgers, Brady, Will Fuller, Marvin Jones, Matt Ryan. There he goes. Interesting to see Rodgers go that high, you know, with everything that's been going on with the Packers in the draft and during free agency / offseason. His draft stock is kind of tumbled. Tom Brady over someone like Matt Ryan. The hype is real in Tampa Bay. Then Hunter Henry, DeAndre Swift, Jared Cook, Higbee, Montgomery. That is sensational value for David Montgomery. No question about it. But again, this kind of highlights what happens when you go in to a draft with a already predetermined mindset and telling yourself, I'm going to hit the running back situation very hard from the get-go. Sometimes you reach on players, sometimes there's other players afterwards in future rounds that make sense to add, but you have to address other positions. So you're kind of behind the 8 ball playing catch up, but you're going to see a really good sense of what our roster maybe should look like, would look like once we go back to our normal draft strategy in a little bit. We're going to go ahead and take Drew Brees here and go with one more bench player to add some depth. And then we're going to restart this and see what we can come up with. So just looking at some of these options, I know Alexander Madison is there. Maybe we can pick him up as a handcuff for Dalvin Cook, but he'll be there later on. So let's just look at our wide receiver options. I like Crowder, I like Shepard, I like Sanders as some PPR options. I'm between Sanders and Jamison Crowder. I will go Sanders here for the pure reason that he is on a better offense. So that's going to kind of go ahead and conclude this quote-unquote zero wide receiver running back heavy draft type of strategy. And to recap it, at quarterback, Drew Brees, Dalvin Cook, Nick Chubb, Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin at wide receiver, Evan Ingram at tight end, Chris Carson. So, I mean, when talking starting running backs on this roster, very deep with Cook, Chubb, and Chris Carson. You could have even made the case we should have gone a running back in the 4th round. And like I said, in future examples of these types of videos, we probably will, but we decided to make that shift to wide receivers earlier on. Now let's go ahead and restart this and see what type of roster we put together if we go best player available round by round. And you can already see that we're going to be pretty much in the same position here from the get-go. So when we restart this, the players selected before aren't changed. So to some extent, we'll have a lot of similar selections or possibilities to make. So I'm not actually diverging from our first selection. I love Dalvin Cook, and I kind of told you guys that even if Michael Thomas was still there, Dalvin Cook would be my selection. But essentially what taking Dalvin Cook there does now is allow us to go ahead and look at another pass catcher or a wide receiver in this later round. So let's see what's available to us in the wide receiver category. And you see Mike Evans is still there, Allen Robinson, Kenny Golladay, DJ Moore. I know the board says to take Nick Chubb or someone like Travis Kelce. And look, Nick Chubb, like I told you guys before, I'm not that high on because of Kareem Hunt and of his pass catching ability. Travis Kelce, definitely tempting, but I like what I can go ahead and get with some options later on at tight end. So we're going to go ahead and go Mike Evans here. So right from the get-go, starting the 2nd round, we already have a difference in the selection process. We've got Mike Evans instead of Nick Chubb. So now let's go back to the draft board, and this is where you're going to see some more and more changes as we go deeper and deeper into these rounds. So Miles Sanders, Kenny Golladay, Travis Kelce, Cooper Kupp, George Kittle, Nick Chubb lasts all the way until the start of the 3rd round, then Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson right after one another. So let's go ahead and look at the cheat sheet here with these best players available. I'm looking at Amari Cooper. I'm looking at someone like a Chris Carson again, a Juju Smith-Schuster potentially, but knowing that there's going to be definitely a drop-off in wide receiver talent in a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and select Amari Cooper here, and then just looking at these rankings and knowing some of the people that will be available to me, I can go ahead and probably still land someone like a James Conner or a David Montgomery as my RB2, and I feel a lot better about it considering that our RB1 is Dalvin Cook. So we're going to go ahead here, take Amari Cooper. It's honestly between Amari Cooper and Chris Carson, and maybe to some extent I just want to switch it up a little bit and take Amari Cooper and see what happens here instead of taking Chris Carson, since that was our pick in our running back heavy first draft. But again, just this is all practice to see how it plays out and the drafting process in it of itself. So let's go ahead and go back to the draft board. What happened after our Amari Cooper pick? You see Allen Robinson Todd Gurley, Chris Carson, DJ Moore, Zach Ertz, Adam Thielen, good value pick, end of the third round, Adam Thielen, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. In the fourth round, Keenan Allen, Robert Woods, Courtland Sutton. The run on tight ends there, and then Melvin Gordon. So right now, let's go ahead and go back to the cheat sheet. And I mentioned a guy like James Conner. In the fourth round, I like that value. Now, maybe there's a chance that he falls to us in the fifth round, and we can get another wide receiver here, like a Calvin Ridley that we really like, a Devontae Parker. But what I will actually try to do is I will try to go James Conner first, and then potentially double down on another running back to see how that plays out. So we're going James Conner here. And who knows, maybe if Calvin Ridley is still there, he might be the selection. But as soon as we say that, he is drafted. So that won't be the case. Just as a reminder of the picks after us: A.J. Brown, Diggs, Calvin Ridley, Devontae Parker, Le'Veon Bell, Tyler Lockett, Singletary, DK Metcalf. And then we are back on the clock now. So let's look at back to the cheat sheet, best players available. DJ Chark, David Johnson is there. He is an intriguing player in Houston. He has a lot of pass catching ability, and he's the number one guy for them. Now, obviously, they still have offensive line questions, but I would go ahead and take a chance on David Johnson at this point. He definitely has a high ceiling. The floor has definitely lowered since a couple years back, but I'm going to go ahead and take a chance on him. I'm not too worried about his injury history. It hasn't been anything all that serious, so we're going David Johnson here. And as you can see, even though we went running back with our first pick, similar to when we went zero wide receiver, we've still been able to get some other good running backs later on. And as a result, our wide receivers are pretty strong. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing here because, granted, this team isn't as strong at the running back position as the previous. So I'm going to go ahead and give myself some insurance and go another running back here in David Montgomery. I'm very excited about his prospects as a sophomore running back. I think he has a very large arrow pointing up. Now, looking at the selections here, I do want to go tight end again here at some point in time. Evan Ingram was selected, so maybe we could have gone Evan Ingram instead of David Montgomery, but when you know you want your guy, you go ahead and you take a chance on him. I don't think that the realistic ADP of David Montgomery will be as low as what we saw previously, like in the 7th or 8th round. That's why I'm trying to make this a little bit more realistic and taking him here in the 6th. So looking at our tight end options with Evan Ingram off the board, to me, there's a big drop off in talent. So what I will go ahead and do instead is look at my quarterback options. And I've got Drew Brees, I've got Matt Ryan. So I personally prefer Matt Ryan. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here is take him. Then let's look at some of our other options. We can go ahead and look at some of our other wide receivers after Mike Evans and Amari Cooper. And looking at those names: Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones, John Brown, Jamison Crowder, Emmanuel Sanders. So starting to get pretty similar to what we were seeing before. And as far as tight ends are concerned, I can go ahead and take one now, but I've told you guys before how high I am on someone like a Jack Doyle. So I'll wait and take him in a little bit. Instead here, I'll go ahead and take Emmanuel Sanders again. I like his PPR upside, and we're getting another wide receiver. And then I'll probably go ahead and get maybe 2 tight ends afterwards to go ahead and give myself some insurance with a pick like a Jack Doyle just to be safe. So we're going to go ahead and take first Mike Gesicki, and then afterwards we'll go ahead and take Jack Doyle as our next guy. So as you can see, we are back on the clock. Jack Doyle is our pick here. But let's look at this roster overall and compare it. So at quarterback, Matt Ryan versus the 0 wide receiver team. That was Drew Brees, so that's pretty much a wash. Running backs and wide receivers, that's where it gets very interesting, because previously we had Dalvin Cook, then we had Nick Chubb and Chris Carson versus Dalvin Cook, James Conner, and David Johnson now, along with David Montgomery. So look, there's definitely a drop off from someone like a Nick Chubb and Chris Carson, who I honestly kind of have Chris Carson higher than Nick Chubb in some categories. But we've got a little bit more depth here with James Conner, David Johnson, David Montgomery. There's more injury questions, definitely. That's why some of these guys are available. But I don't think in terms of the group that we came away with now versus the previous one that there's that big of a drop-off. Like I said, since we were still able to get Dalvin Cook, I feel comfortable at this position. But then at wide receivers where it gets really interesting, because our two wide receivers were Calvin Ridley and Terry McLaurin previously, and then we had to go and pick up a bunch of other guys. So compare that to Mike Evans and Amari Cooper, and this team, I think in that department, is much better. Then you get to tight end. We could have had a chance to take Evan Ingram, sure, but we decided to go with Mike Gesicki and then Jack Doyle instead. Maybe a little bit of a drop-off, but not enough to, I think, make up for the fact that we were able to get Evans and Cooper. So all in all, I think we did a pretty good job of highlighting that in certain situations, even though it can be tempting to go 0 wide receivers, 0 running backs, whatever it is, in the long run, it might be better just to go best player available and just to go by your draft board. Now, that's not to say that 0 wide receiver strategy will never work and that I'm against taking running backs, stockpiling them in the first couple of rounds. I think the running back position really kind of wins out in terms of other skill positions, especially if you can get impact guys. But again, at the end of the day, just go by your draft board. Go by your pre-draft rankings, and I believe it will work out. We'll go ahead and do some more of these examples, do some 0 running back, 0 wide receiver strategies. And in the meantime, let me hear it in the comment section. What did you guys think of this exercise? What works for you guys when you go into these types of drafts, and what strategies do you prefer, if any? And another quick reminder, check out the description on the details about getting a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide now. And as always, if you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and we'll see you guys in future videos.